My name's Peter Shirley. Just a little bit about me. I'm a retired but still active professional nature conservationist and an amateur entomologist. My particular interest is insect galls, but we're going to cover a little bit about other galls as well this morning. Galls are a fascinating phenomenon, or at least they are to some of us, and I hope by the end of this morning that you'll think that they're fascinating too. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and they're caused by all sorts of different things. So this one, just as a quick introduction, is a gall caused by a moth on rose bay willow herb. And it's generated by the larva of the moth feeding in the stem. And it's typical of stem galls in general, amongst a lot of different causes and a lot of different host plants, with typically an oval swelling in the stem. For the lepidopterists amongst you, this is the species that causes this is Montha sternipinella. I don't think it's got a common name. So what is a gall? A gall may be defined, as I say, may be defined as, because there is continuing debate about how to accurately define a gall. But my colleague Margaret Redfern and myself, who jointly author the Field Studies Council Gall Identification Keys in their Aid Gap series, have agreed on this one: growths of plant tissue caused by another organism which involve an increase in both the size and or the number of cells, and provide food and shelter for the causer. That's stretched a little bit when we come to fungal gall causes, but that's basically what a gall is. And some galls are actually caused by plants. So I'll just show you one of those to start with. Mistletoe. Mistletoe is a gall causer because where it attaches itself and grows into its host plant, the hostorium, there is excess tissue produced, nutritive tissue, by the plant, which feeds the mistletoe. So that may be a surprising gall causer to you, but it is. And I guess you don't see much mistletoe in the northwest, but down here in the West Midlands, and particularly Worcestershire and Gloucestershire, is the sort of national stronghold for mistletoe. So we get a lot of it. So most galls are caused by mites and insects, but also by the other groups of organisms that are listed here. So you can see there's quite a variety. And some examples of galls. This is the hop gall or artichoke gall, so-called, on oak trees. Oak trees supports a great variety of galls, particularly, but not exclusively, caused by cynnipid wasps in the Hymenoptera. If you cut one of these open, and by the way, it's very prominent, this, you find a lot of these around at this time of the year. And it's one of the galls that persists on the trees from year to year. So you find old ones, and you often find old ones that have split open because birds, for instance, will attack galls and open them to eat the larva inside. The gall itself is not this swollen mass of bud scales that you can see. It's a little thin-walled, egg-shaped gall down inside here, which is ejected through the top of these galls when the gall matures, and the larva is actually inside the little egg-shaped gall inside the inner gall. This is an example of a gall caused by a gall midge of the Sechidomyidae, Contarinea tiliarum. His name gives you a clue as to the host. This is on lime trees in the leaf petiole, as you can see. Another one on a herbaceous host is caused by a psyllid a scale insect. This is caused by Livorum juncorum on rushes, and it's quite an attractive gall. It's almost like a flower on the rush. Mites cause various sorts of galls on many different hosts, and this is Acolytus longicitosus on birch. Where it's present, it's not all that common, but where it's present, as you can see, it's very prominent and typical of many mite galls. It consists of an erinium. It's a hairy gall, and the mites live amongst and feed on and in the hairs that they produce. And an example of a fungal gall, and there's quite a lot of these in this genus. This is a Gymnosperangium, and this is Gymnosperangium sabinae, which occurs on pear trees. If you've got a pear tree in your garden, you will almost certainly have this gall on it. Doesn't do any harm to the tree, doesn't affect the crop at all, but it's ubiquitous. I don't think I've ever come across a pear tree at this time of the year that hasn't got this gall on it. So thinking particularly about arthropods, I've mentioned the mites, especially the Areophoidea. And then as far as the insects are concerned, these are the main orders of insects that include gall causers in their number. And you'll notice from this that most of them are insect orders with complete metamorphosis. And that's significant as far as galls are concerned, because the galls provide a home and the food for the larvae of these orders. So they're eating nutritive tissue inside the gall, and most, but not all, most larvae in galls pupate in the galls and then emerge from the gall as adult insects. I've put thrips in brackets at the bottom because so far as we know, we have no galls caused by thrips in this country, but in other parts of the world, they are significant gall causers. And where wasps are concerned, the causers are either cinnipid wasps or chalcid wasps, which makes them a minority in their order, because most of the order are, of course, parasitoids, or they're like the common wasps, the yellow jackets, vespulas, and so on. So it's unusual that they have evolved to be plant eaters rather than consumers of other insects. They do make up to it for a certain extent, because galls contain lots of parasitoids as well as the gall causers, but we will come on to that shortly. An example of a gall that's easily overlooked. This is a gall on the seeds of birch trees, a Semiodobia gall. And there are actually 3 species of this, and they produce slightly different galls with slightly different signs on the birch catkins when they mature, as you can see here. As far as finding galls is concerned, because it's one thing about knowing they exist, it's another maybe to find them. The most fruitful place to look is woodland edge, where there's a good variety of shrubs and trees. You find more galls at the edges of woodlands than you do, for instance, in the heart of ancient woodlands. Galls are often quite difficult to find, not least because when you're looking in mature trees, a lot of the galls are going to be out of reach above your head anyway. So young growth, and particularly vigorous growth, because the plant's own nutrient system is being hijacked by the gall causers. There's a lot of galls on young trees that are growing, and they're capturing the nutrients that are moving through the vascular bundles. There are, though, plenty of galls on herbaceous plants. Sometimes they can be quite obvious, like one you'll see later on thistles. But you often need to get down on your hands and knees to look for those and to find them. But if you look, you will certainly find them. So galls are found on a whole range of plants, also on a few fungi, but you can see the vast majority are on dicotyledons. There are some important galls on grasses, but most of them are on dicots. And there is a disproportionate abundance of a variety, I should say, of species of gall causers on these three families in particular. So you can see on the Asteraceae in Britain, oh, you get a prize for spotting the spelling mistakes in here. I noticed them last night when I was running through this for the final time before giving the talk. But you can see there's 100, more than 100 on the Asteraceae, more than 90 on willows, more than 90 again on the pea family, rose family, and the beech family. Although beech trees do have galls, and I think what's the other beech tree? My mind's gone blank. It'll come back to me. Most of the galls in this country in that family are on oak trees, by far the greatest number. And here's a very prominent gall which affects the willow family. This is an aphid gall. I should have said before when I was talking about the complete metamorphosis, the one order that causes a lot of galls that doesn't have complete metamorphosis but has nymphs and adults is the aphids and scale insects. And this is an aphid gall found on black poplar and its hybrids. It's quite common, easily found in the autumn because you can pick them up off the floor as the leaves come down off the trees. You will find these and other aphid galls on the petioles. So that's one to look out for now. And the aphid nymphs actually live inside the gall and feed inside it. What do we know about the history of galls? Well, they go back a long time. The oldest known gall was on a tree fern in Illinois, found on a fossil, and thought to be just over 300 million years old. So as plants have evolved for millions of years, so as this particular form of eating plants, particular form of herbivory developed and evolved with them. This one, not this one, the one I'm talking about in Illinois, was on the aerial root galls. No, sorry, there's also one being found on the aerial root galls on another tree fern, which is about 290 million years old. So they do go back a long way. Gall wasps and gall midges, which are the most numerous, have the most numerous gall-causing species really in this country. They evolved alongside and on flowering plants in the Cretaceous period from 140 to 70 million years ago. And others have been more recent. So there was a lot of picture wing flies, tephrittids, which occur on thistles and their related species. And they're just Johnny-come-latelys really. They've only been around for about 34 million years. And the thing about gall causers is that they have to be closely adapted to their hosts. So they're mainly, not entirely, but certainly the more ornate galls and the more complex galls, they mainly gall just either one species or one genus or one subfamily or family. There are some galls which are more general, but they tend to be very simple galls, like bacterial galls on the roots of Fabaceae. which are the nitrogen fixing nodules. Those are galls. Rarely seen, of course, because we don't go around digging plants up. So that's a brief sort of history of galls and some of the ways that they've evolved. They're found on all parts of plants, but not in equal proportions. So you see here the proportions of where they're found. And interestingly, the majority of galls are found on leaves. I say interestingly because as we live in a part of the world where we have deciduous trees, the leaves are only there for half the year, 6 months or 8 months or whatever. But they support more gall causes than any other part of the plants. But you can see from this that you will find them elsewhere. The ones on stems tend to be the easiest to find year round because the galls are there, because they've distorted the stems, and so empty galls will stay on the tree sometimes for years. Root galls obviously more difficult to investigate. You have to make a special effort for that. But there are plenty of galls on flowers and fruit. So here's an example of Synipid wasp gall. This is caused by Aelax papaveris on poppies. Very easily spotted because the seed head is very swollen. And if you cut it open, you can see there in the middle, you can just see that there are 3 cells there in the middle, each of which will contain a larva, and there will be other cells in the flesh as well. And so galls take all sorts of forms: swellings, nodules, patches of hairs, which I've already mentioned, rolls, folds, dimples, blisters, pustules, discs, balls, generally in large buds. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And people have been looking at them and puzzling over them and studying them for centuries, really. Theophrastus, the Greek philosopher, knew about some galls, and he and others since have talked about their use in medicine and herbalism. A lot of galls concentrate tannins, and that is an astringent substance. So they've been used because of that as medicines. And it's probably also where we get the link between galls and bitterness from, as it says in the Bible, as bitter as gall. Interesting thing is that we still don't know entirely how they do what they do, the gall causes. Galls are initiated either during the laying of eggs, but more frequently, as far as insects are concerned, when the emerging larvae start to feed. And what we do know is that they're intercepting the host's metabolism, the growth processes and the hormone mechanisms. And some very complex things are produced, and some strange things happen. So when you take some oak galls like the nopper gall, which we'll see later, which is on acorns, and other galls on oak, they produce a very sweet, sticky substance akin to nectar, probably as a defense against parasitoids who try to land on the gall and to drill down to lay their eggs, but are put off, I would imagine, by landing in a sticky mess, which is all over the gall. But the thing about oak trees is that they don't naturally produce nectar themselves, because oak trees are wind pollinated. So there's an example of where the plant is being induced to produce something which other plants produce, but it doesn't normally do so itself. So there's lots still to learn and to understand about galls. There are some very complicated life cycles involved with galls, and this one is the well-known oak apple, which you will find in the spring, and you'll find old galls on trees all the year round. And here's a diagram of the life cycle. So if you look look at the bottom first, and there are root galls involved, which you can see bottom left. And the root galls, inside the root galls are wingless agamic female wasps. And I put the tree in to sort of demonstrate the job that this wasp has. So it emerges from a gall underground, and then it's about 3 millimeters long, this wasp. It then actually crawls up the bole of the tree, along the branches, to the twigs and the buds, and it lays its eggs in the buds. Now that's quite a walk for a 3 millimeter long wasp, I would suggest, but that's what they do. And you probably, most of you will be familiar with the sort of pinky brown, papery galls that they produce in the spring, which we call oak apples. They produce male and female wasps. So that's the sexual generation. They mate, and then the females go down underground and lay their eggs on the roots to start the whole process over again. But they spend 2 winters in the roots. So this explains why, if you see a tree this year that's got a very heavy crop, shall we say, of oak apples, and next year has none or very few, and the year after has a lot again, that is the 2-year life cycle in operation. There are 2 entirely discrete, well, I say entirely discrete, I suspect there will be a little bit of overlap from time to time, but basically 2 entirely discrete populations of this wasp on any particular oak tree. And the offspring always resemble their grandparents rather than their parents, so to speak. As is quite usual with this, it's called alternation of generations. In this group, the females, both the agamic ones and the sexual ones, are diploid, and the males are haploid. And you can get as many as 300 insects out of one of these oak galls. Most galls only have 1 gall causer in. These have hundreds, scores and hundreds, and lots of other insects besides, as we'll see in a moment. So there's the typical oak apple. Now, a little bit of human and cultural history with this. Supporters of the Stuarts used to wear a sprig of oak with an oak apple in it on Oak Apple Day, which was May the 29th. It was also known as Royal Oak Day, and until 1859 it was a public holiday. It was the birthday of Charles II, and of course he famously hid in an oak tree while he was escaping Cromwell's troops, and it was also the date of his restoration to the throne. So for a long time, as I say, supporters of the Stuart cause used to wear a sprig with an oak apple in, and there was a tradition with the boys in the village that it was called Shick Shack Day rather than Royal Oak Day. And if you were found not wearing an oak apple, you would be beaten with stinging nettles, which sounds very uncomfortable to me. And that is the root gall, the one that you never see unless you actually start digging around oak trees and looking for it. So that's a typical life cycle. One feature it doesn't have, which we'll mention again later on, is that it all happens on the same host species. There's a lot of centipede galls that have alternation of generations, but on different species of host oaks. So just have a quick look at some oak galls. I don't know how much home oak you've got in the northwest, but there's a group of gall causers in the genus Plagiotrochus. This is Plagiotrochus coriaceus on home oak. Little sort of, again, typical of some species. Small pustule-like galls, but where the eggs are laid close together by the females, they tend to merge into a rather amorphous mass. It's one you might be familiar with, that some years is very abundant and then can disappear apparently for quite a long time, be difficult to find. Cynips divisa on the underside of oak leaves. You should find that this time of the year. This is a bud gall, unsurprisingly called the cotton wool gall, which is an Andricus gall. Andricus is a very big genus of gall causers. This is Andricus Quercus ramuli, sorry, I said it's a bud gall. It's not. It's a catkin gall found on the catkins, and it completely encloses the catkin, as you can see here. And then we have the well-known and often very numerous spangle galls. There's 2 species on this leaf. Neuroterus numismalis, which is the rusty-coloured one, and Neuroterus numismalis, sometimes called the silk button gall. And the silk button gall in particular can completely cover the underside of an oak leaf and distort the leaf and twist it, because there are so many of them on it, and you can see none of the leaf surface at all on some of the leaves that it affects. And one of our most attractive galls, I think, sometimes called the cherry gall, Cynips quercus folii. These are about now, they are about the size of cherries. And they, some galls, like the spangle galls on the bottom right there, fall from the leaf before the leaf falls from the tree. And in fact, where people raise game birds in woodland coveys, they're quite an attractive food for the game birds, and quite an important food for them in the autumn when they fall from the leaves. But Cynips quercus folii actually stay on the leaves until the leaf falls, so you'll find them in leaf litter as autumn goes on. And here's one of the galls that has a sticky secretion that I was talking about earlier. This is Andricus quercus calicis, or calicis, the Nopper gall, which arrived in this country sometime in the 1960s, and has since become widespread and abundant. And some years, every acorn on a particular tree will be affected by these. And you can have several galls on a single acorn. And like the Fecundatrix gall, the hop gall that I mentioned earlier, there's actually a void inside here. There's a hole in the top, and there's a void inside the gall. At the bottom of the void is a little egg-shaped inner gall, and that's where the wasp larva is. Now, I've got to guess whether you can see this or not. The competition for egg-laying sites amongst females, sometimes they lay eggs together or in the same bud. I don't know whether you can see this or not, but this is what we call a chimera. And the long strap-like projections are Andricus aries gall, and the other one is an Andricus lucidus gall, a hedgehog gall. Both of those have arrived in this country in the last 20 or 30 years.
Are you able to get that on the video so we can see it? We can't see it.
You can't see. I don't know. I won't risk stopping the talk to do that. We might come back to it when we're doing the questions later. I think.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for letting me know. So there's an example of some oak galls, and we've looked at the life cycle of one of them. Here's an aphid gall. I showed you Pemphigus spirotheca earlier. This is Pemphigus bursarius. Occurs in the same place on the petiole of poplars. And this also, some of you probably know more about this than I do if you know about aphids, has a very complex life cycle. All aphids apparently have alternating generations with agamic and sexual generations. So here on the right, you can see, if you start bottom right, that there are winged females produced from root galls on members of the daisy family, the Asteraceae. They move to the bark of poplars, but they don't cause any galls, where they reproduce before moving on in the summer to the leaves. The ones on the bark produce the fecundatrix generation, and then there's several generations of wingless aphids coming out of the galls here, before winged gamete females fly off to the roots of one of the daisy family to start the whole thing all over again. Now, where, as in this case, there is a herbaceous and a woody host, generally speaking, galls are not produced on the herbaceous host, but only on the woody host. So that's a typical aphid life cycle. I hope you can see this. This is a food web. There's a lot going on inside galls. I have a shorter talk than this sometimes, which I call sex and violence in a nutshell. And if you just take a minute to look at this, at the bottom, sorry, where is it? It sort of just center left, you can see Andricus cholare, the cinnipid wasp gall causer. And this causes marble galls, which are also very common, also an introduced species, but introduced in the 19th century. The arrows on this gall go from the source of food to the feeder. And I hope you can see there's a whole lot of feeders, Eupelma species, Torimids, Megastigmus. They're all chalcid wasps. And they will all have a go at a marble gall and try to lay their eggs to parasitize the larva. Some of them also parasitize other chalcid wasps, so they are hyperparasitoids. And then there are also in galls, both in midge galls and in cinnipid galls in particular, species related to the gall causer that don't cause galls but live in galls, and they're called inquilines. So we've got 3 inquilines shown here in the marble gall, the Ceroptrix at the top, and then a couple of cyanogus species. And they too are attacked by parasitoids. As far as the inquilines are concerned, some of them are lethal to the gall causers and some of them aren't. So in this case, Cyanogus umbraculus is harmless to the gall causer because it produces its own cells within the walls of the gall, whereas the other Cyanogus species actually causes the death of cholare because it produces its cell in the middle and kills the cholare gall causer in doing so. So the ecology and the biology of galls is and can be quite complex and is still an area that can be studied, and there's still much to be found out with new species arriving, species not recorded before in certain galls, and so on and so forth. And if you breed galls out, you will soon have a nice collection of different species of wasps. So nearly all parasitoids in galls in this country are chalcid wasps. Oh, didn't change. No, there we. Oh, right there. That's sorry. I should have put that up before. That's what a marble gall looks like. Some of you are probably familiar with it. And sorry, it's not a very good photo. It's obviously of a mounted specimen. That is the gall causing wasp itself, Andricus cholare. Here's the food web of a very well-known gall. I'm sure that most of you have come across this, even if you don't know what it is or didn't know what it is at the time. This is a robin's pincushion, so-called, or a bedegua gall on roses. And you see it has a lot in common with that catkin gall of Andricus quercus ramuli that I showed you earlier, where the gall has produced a covering of short, wiry hairs. These are usually, well, they're green to start with, but then they turn red as the season goes on. And old brown ones hang around on rose bushes for a long time. And so you can see again, same sort of food where loads and loads of chalcid parasitoids. But I call your attention to the ichneumon top center, Orthopelma mediator. So that is the one ichneumon wasp that is a parasitoid in galls in this country. I'm not immediately aware of any other, but if any of you here today know better, then please say so when we get to the discussion afterwards. This gall, it can occur in large numbers, or it can just occur in ones and twos in different places. But if you start looking at roses in the wild, you will undoubtedly find these galls. And I think they appear in a Beatrix Potter story somewhere as well. Right. And there, that's a section of an open gall where you can see the wasp larva inside. Whether that is the gall causer itself, or whether it is its main, the main inquiline in this is a synipid wasp called Periclystus brantii, and almost every one of these galls has got Periclystus in, as well as the gall causer. These are rather like oak apples in respect to the fact that they produce a lot of insects, not just one in the middle of the gall. And just some specimen photographs. That is a better photograph of the gall causer, Diplolepis rosae. That is Orthopelma mediator. And that is a typical chalcid. That looks like a torrimid to me. But again, if any of you are more expert on identifying the wasps, you can tell me differently, but torrimids do have lung ovipositors. Not all chalcids have that particular feature. Just going to go abroad for a moment. I don't expect you to be able to read all the bits and pieces on this, but I know that the talk is available to you afterwards. Fig wasps are unique amongst gall causers in that they have a symbiotic relationship with the hosts that they cause their galls on. So in effect, these tiny wasps are only a couple of millimeters long. They drive some forest ecosystems where figs are the significant members of the canopy, because without them, the figs can't reproduce and they can't grow. There are about, I was surprised to learn this a long time ago, there are about 700 species of figs in the world, and a similar number of chalcid, these are chalcid gall causers, chalcid fig wasps, both as gall causers and inquilines. Simplifying the life cycle by a lot. What happens is that fertilized females leave a fig. Bear in mind, by the way, that fig is an inside-out flower. So inside a fig are all the parts of the flower, you just can't see them. So female wasps leave, fertilized female wasps leave a fig. They find another fig and they burrow their way inside, and they lay eggs inside, but they don't lay eggs everywhere that they can, because if they did, the fig wouldn't produce any seed. So they lay eggs inside, which produce males and females that mate, and while they're in there, the females pick up pollen grains, and then they leave that fig and fly off to another fig and burrow their way inside and start the whole thing over again. And there's also an element of social behavior involved in some cases, which is that the males inside the figs, once they've mated with the females, they often are the wasps that excavate the exit hole, because they're much smaller than the females, but they work together to make a big enough exit hole for the females. And then they will go outside the wasp, outside the fig, surround the hole they've just excavated, and guard the female from marauding ants or other predators while she emerges and flies off. So to me, this is just an incredible life cycle, and well worth taking a closer look at. Fortunately, the figs we have in this country don't need all of this to reproduce. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any figs in this country because we haven't got the fig wasps. So going back to the more mundane and the normal, just a quick look at some galls on poplars and willows. These used to be called Pontania, then they were Eupontania, and now they are Eura Proxima. So they've changed the name twice, I think, in the last 10 years. Eura Proxima, generally called bean galls, and very common, very easy to spot because they're bright red. And these are galls where the gall causer doesn't pupate in the gall. The larva bites its way out of the gall and pupates in the ground underneath the host trees. Find these on cracked willows, and then some galls on goat willows. This one is a gall midge, the one now on the right, Rhabdophoga cinerarium on goat willow, quite easy to spot. And this is a typical sort of gall formation, occurs on a number of hosts caused by different things, which is by shortening the internodes, you get these rosettes of leaves, and the gall larva is down in the middle of the rosette. And that's a very typical one. There's another Eura bridgemanii on goat willow. And one of the most common of all, which is a midge again, Rhabdophaga salicis on goat willow. Another genus that supports a number of galls. On the left, first of all, just those little pustules on the leaves. There are a number of these on field maples, sycamores, and other acers, although not so far as we're aware yet in this country on the ornamental Japanese acers that a lot of us have in our gardens. The taxonomy of these gall mites on acers is complex, not properly understood, and constantly under revision. But I'm fairly sure that this one is something called Aeseria myriadium on field maple. We're about to produce a new version of the gall keys, and there's some updates on the different relationships between hosts and mite galls on those. On the right is Aeseria fraxinivora on the keys of ash. Turns the keys into these sort of spongy brown structures, most easily found in the winter and very easily spotted from half a mile away, really, because the tree looks entirely different where it's got this infestation to where it hasn't. Some galls are just little folds. Some folds are not galls. This is one of the problems with defining a gall. It's all to do with whether there's a multiplication of cells or not. But this is considered a gall, Eriophyes convolvens, which is on spindle, on euonymus. And you won't find a walnut tree in this country, I don't think, without this one, Aeseria erinaeus, on it. There's one or two other mite galls on walnut trees as well. I mean, I've got a tiny walnut tree growing in my front garden. I can see it now while I'm talking to you. And that always has these galls on. But more spectacularly, sometimes mite galls can do things like this. This is Aeseria echii on bugloss, where the whole plant is fasciated. You certainly know when you come across this. Some fungal galls, just to give you some examples. That is Tephrina prunei on prunus, sometimes called pocket plum. So you can see there's two fairly normal ones there, and two greatly elongated and lightly coloured structures, and those are infested fruits on prunus. Another one that I have in my garden. And then this one, you can't miss this one. It's about Tephrina alni on the cones of alder. And this seems to have been increasing and becoming more common over the past 20 years or so. At one time, nobody ever talked about it or saw it really, but now it's seen quite a lot. This might be a bit difficult to see, but can you see the little yellow pustules on the leaves of this? This is a Puccinia. Lots of Puccinias are gall causers. Puccinia smyrnii on Alexanders. And sometimes you come across Alexanders, patches of Alexander plants, where all the plants have got a lot of these all over them. No, they're bright yellow and they stand out really well. Earlier on, we saw a Gymnosperangium on pear. This is Gymnosperangium confusum on Mespilus, on medlar. So you can see very similar to the one on pear, where the spore-producing bodies are very prominent and causing a gall on the tree. And this is an important gall. This is Claviceps purpurea, or ergot. It's got a common name. And it's a smut gall on cereals. And it causes an illness in mammals, humans as well as livestock, called St. Anthony's fire. Very unpleasant thing. It used to be a problem in previous centuries when grain wasn't cleaned properly before bread was baked. So you get outbreaks of St. Anthony's fire where a baker might have used infested grain. And it's still a problem for livestock when it gets into hay and silage. So that's an important gall from our point of view. Just a few examples of gall midges and similar. This is actually an anthomoid gall, Cheirosia betuliti. I'm sorry about all the Latin names, scientific names, but a lot of these don't have common names. Cheirosia betuliti on male fern. Again, a little bit like the Rhabdophaga on willow, where it's causing bunching of the foliage. I was going to say leaves then, but they're not leaves on ferns, are they? This is one of the picture wing flies, a very prominent gall where you have it. You may have this in the northwest. It's been spreading north for some years now. It's caused by Urophora cardui on creeping thistle. And this has been used in Canada, I think, for attempted biological control of thistles, which are considered to be invasive non-natives and a bit of a problem in places. Although to my knowledge, it doesn't actually affect the ability of the plant to produce seeds. So I don't quite understand the logic of that. There are quite a lot of these in North America anyway, related species. The ball gall on goldenrod is one, for instance. And this is one that's easily spotted in any white umbel of wild carrot, Kypheria pericopicola. Got a very long name for a very small insect, very common, and also common on stinging nettles are these pustules in the leaves, and also heavy infestations can affect the stems and the petioles as well. Dasyneura urticae. Just a little bit more about galls themselves, then a bit about the sort of history and culture in relation to people and what we do with galls. Recent arrivals. This is Andricus grossularii, sexual generation on turkey oak catkins. And just a word about these recent arrivals. They mainly need turkey oak to complete their life cycle. They have one generation on our native oaks, Roba and Petrea, and one generation on turkey oak, Ceres, Quercus ceres. Turkey oak began to be planted in this country from about the 18th century onwards, and it's now very widespread. And there are lots of self-set turkey oaks in the wild. They're not just restricted to large estates and planted woodlands and so on. And so it has enabled these gall wasps that are arriving that need turkey oak to thrive here. Chances are they've been arriving for centuries, but couldn't survive because there were no turkey oaks. This is another one on turkey oak catkins, Pseudoneroterus saliens. The little red growths here are the galls. They're all cinnipid wasps, by the way. These are. So that's on turkey oak and on its hybrids, there's a hybrid between Quercus ceris and Quercus suber, the cork oak, and this Lucum oak is in the same group, which is a cultivar. This is Andricus aries in its mature state before it becomes brown, like the one I was showing you earlier. Now, interestingly, because you cover the northwest, some years ago, probably 15 or so years ago, this had just arrived in this country, and it was turning up here and there. And I heard of some that had turned up in Cheshire. And I made a special trip from West Bromwich to rural Cheshire to see these Andricus aries galls. If I'd have been more patient, I wouldn't have needed to make the trip, because 3 or 4 years ago, I had an oak sapling from a friend's garden. And the first year it was in my garden, it produced some Andricus aries galls. So I had a round trip to Cheshire for nothing in the end. And it is now becoming much more common. And I'm guessing that you will find it around your area. And this is a very pretty little gall, but it's very tiny, Andricus gemmeus or gemmeus, which I think arrived in this country first recorded in 2008. Now, interestingly, it does have a sexual generation on turkey oak, but the sexual generation hasn't been found yet in this country. And that's just an example, a better photo of the others of what a typical Andricus adult looks like. Hunched appearance, fat abdomen, basically brown, and very few veins in the wings. Right, it's one that is maybe important to us, maybe not. The Oriental chestnut gall wasp has arrived in this country a few years ago. It's now becoming more widespread. There's a couple of examples of the galls. There's an example of the wasp. This is a black cinnipid wasp. This is a notifiable pest. So if you come across it, you should notify the Forestry Commission. Only because in other parts of Europe in particular, where sweet chestnuts are grown commercially for the crop, this does a lot of damage if it's left unchecked. But as we don't crop sweet chestnuts in this country, it's not something I don't think that's ever commercially grown. I don't think it's going to be too harmful to us in Britain, but it's an interesting one to look out for. So a little bit about galls and people. The Aleppo gall, which is a generic name for probably half a dozen closely related species, the main one of which might be Andricus infectorius, which has just arrived in this country anyway, has been imported. These have been imported for many years because galls are used to make ink, amongst other things, and also for tanning leather. The word tanning is related to tannic, and galls concentrate tannic acid. These more than most, these are about 50%, I think, tannins in their composition. And there's a historic link with these that goes back before Charles II to Charles I. Charles I granted the East India Company its first charter. And he gave them permission to import, amongst other things, white pepper, rich carpets of Camembert and Persia, mirabilians. I've never found out what mirabilians are, but they sound interesting. Mirabilians, musk, silver, wormwood, galls, sugar, and candy. So as long ago as the 17th century, we were importing galls into this country to use for ink and so on. We'll come back to that in a moment. This is maize or corn smut, also known as the ambrosia of the Aztecs, and is a delicacy It's always been eaten in South America, very sweet apparently. And in fact, it's grown as a crop. So corn is grown, it's infected with the corn smut so that you can eat the corn smut. This is a gall you'll find in this country. This is Rondiniola bursaria, found on ground ivy. It's quite common, it's quite easy to find. And that is eaten in France and Sweden. I don't know why France and Sweden in particular, but it is eaten there because it's very sweet. And various other galls are local food, particularly in South and Central America. And nothing to do with food, but talking about Mexico, you might have heard of jumping beans. Well, jumping beans are galls, and it's the larva inside the so-called bean that causes them to jump. And they're found in different parts of the world, and not just in Mexico, but that's what jumping beans are. They're actually galls with larvae inside that cause them to move. And a final one for food. This is from Australia. It's called a bloodwood apple or a bush coconut, found in the Australian desert, and it is what they call bush tucker. So if I'm a celebrity goes to Australia and they give them bush tucker, the chances are they'll be giving them one of these to eat, including the insect inside, which is a Cytococcus species of psyllid. So there you are. So if you go to Australia, you can look this out in the desert and see what it tastes like. I must say, I don't really fancy it. Although I have eaten beetle larvae in Africa, so maybe if I was there, I would. Right, I mentioned the use of galls for inks. The finest inks always had gall extracts in them. So inks for printing banknotes, for instance, and up to the 1970s, German legal documents had to be written in gall ink. That had been so for many centuries. They've obviously moved on since then, but less than 100 years ago, it's still being used as a legal requirement in Germany. Stuff made with gall extracts has also been used for black hair dye, turkey red colouring, and tattoo ink also may have gall extracts in it. When the great landed estates were self-sufficient, they made their own inks, and they all had their own recipes for their own inks, and it always included some galls. And the authentication of historic documents can be made if you know what the recipes were of the estates or the families concerned, and you can analyze the ink on the documents. So that's a little known gall connection. And this is one of the most important galls of all, at least in France. This used to be called Phylloxera vestatrix. It's now got a much longer name, which I won't trouble you with, but it's an aphid gall. And it damages grapevines. And in the 19th century, vines were imported from the USA to try to control mildew on the native vines in France. But in fact, that just caused huge problems greater than the mildew, because imported with the vines were these aphids. They produce these leaf galls and they produce root galls, and they destroy the plants. And for a long time, the French didn't know how to control them. They tried flooding vineyards, but the root galls survived that. They didn't know there were root galls anyway. And the reason that they were able to cause all this damage and to be so successful in France is because it was warmer than their native habitats were in North America. And so they were able to thrive and breed in much greater numbers. And the scale of this is staggering, really. They arrived in France in the 1860s. After the Prussian War in 1870, Bismarck, the then German leader, extracted 5 billion francs a year from France as war reparations. And this aphid was costing the country twice as much. And it is still a major pest in France. They still have problems with it. So some galls are very important and very damaging. And going back finally to a bit of literature for, and I've nearly finished, by the way, I can see the time is getting on, for using galls in inks. In The Sword in the Stone, T.H. White wrote, "My leaves come last and go the last. I am a conservative, I am. And out of my apples they make ink, whose words may live as long as me, even as me the oak." So I thought that was a nice quotation. Right, just a few personalities, if that's the right word. One of the earliest people to study galls was John Ray. This is John Ray. And he's the man who established the concept of a species, a concept with which some of us still struggle today as a human construct rather than a natural construct. But that's a different talk, so I won't go into that now. So John Ray was an early gall man. He wasn't a gall man at all, but I just came across him and I thought, how interesting. Sorry, I realised that black doesn't show up very well. But this is a man named Chief Gall who fought with Sitting Bull at the Battle of the Little Bighorn and went into exile with him in Canada. So there we are, a Chief Gall. This is a very good friend of mine, as you can see, Dr. Joe Shorthouse. He's a biologist who lives in Ontario in Canada. He's a world authority on galls on roses. In fact, he's a world authority on roses. And I'll put this in because you can see, you can choose your own number plate where he lives in Canada, and you can probably just make out that his number plate is Galls 1. So, so that's Joe. And now the older people amongst you, dare I say, will know this man's name. This is Dr. Alfred Kinsey, who in the 50s and 60s observed and produced studies on human sexuality. But for 30 years before that, he'd been studying Synapid gall wasps in America, and he was a leading authority on Synapid gall wasps. And we've looked at how complicated their life cycles are with alternation of generations and agamic females and sexual females and so on. So obviously he got to a point where gall wasp sexuality wasn't enough for him, not complex enough probably. So he switched to people and then made his name, because nobody outside the gall world had heard of him before he switched to human sexuality. But there you are, Dr. Alfred Kinsey. And here's a rather strange looking person. Came across this some years ago. This is the character Jaramacho, a Spanish carnival figure who protects children and cattle and brings fertility, hopefully, and always dresses in natural materials. So here we are. This Jaramacho decided that his natural materials would be galls. They all look like marble galls to me. And can you imagine how long it took to thread all those together and to make that costume? So good for him, I say. I think it's a him. Right, that's the end. Just to let you know, though, that here's where you can get more and ongoing information. Facebook, Twitter, and Flickr. Thoroughly recommend Vlad Minierda's gall site website, which covers leaf miners as well. There's always a bit of confusion between leaf miners and gallers. Some leaf miners are gall causers, some aren't. So the one on holly, Phytomyza ilica, isn't a gall causer, for instance. But that's a very good website. And we do have, of course, the British Plant Gall Society, and some of you will no doubt be joining friends of mine on the field meeting that goes with this talk in a few days' time. If you want some literature, I can thoroughly recommend Margaret Redfern's Plant Galls. much more about the relationship to people and how galls are used and so on. Much more scientific stuff, where food webs and all the rest of it. Very comprehensive, best thing ever written on galls, in my opinion. If you want a little pocket book with some good photographs, then the Wild Guide is a good one to have as a starter. If you want to go into more detail, there is the Field Studies Council Aid Gap Key. If I wasn't talking to you now, I would be working on the proofs of the 3rd edition, which will be out either later this year or early next year, if Margaret and I ever get through the proofs, because it's over 400 pages long. So those are all good sources of information and entertainment. Thanks to all those people whose photographs I have used. And there's a nice looking Rose Bodegua gall to finish with. So thank you all for listening. And what do you want to ask me?
Thank you, Pete. That was a fascinating introduction to galls. So if you stop sharing your screen, then we'll go into questions.
Oh, I've gone. Right, I'm back.
Yeah, I just want to say before we go into questions, we've still got spaces on our plant gall workshop next Friday at Marbury Country Park in Northwich. So if anybody's interested to come and have a look for some real life galls, I'll post the link in the chat and you can have a look at that for more information. Just do that now. Yeah, we've had a few questions in the chat already, so I'll go straight on to those.
Okay.
Yeah, so the first one was from Nora Boyle. She said, does Pemphigus sparrowiaceae gall go on Lombardy poplar as well as black poplar?
Well, first of all, hello, Nora. Nice to know that you're here.
Yes.
Nora published something in our journal last year, I think it was, which I had a look at. Right. Well, the answer is I've never found it on black poplar. Sorry, on Lombardy poplar. But there's no reason why it wouldn't be there, because Lombardy poplar is a cultivar of black poplar. So the answer is I'm not aware that it's been found on it. And maybe then the thing to do is to go and find some and to look. The trouble with Lombardy poplars is that most of the growth is way above your head, isn't it?
Yes,
you know,
yes.
So difficult, but there's no reason why it shouldn't be.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we've got a question from Mike K. He said, how do the wasps breathe inside a fig?
How do they breathe? Well, I suppose there's enough space inside a fig for them to respire for the amount of time that they're in there, because they're very tiny. And it may be that the air infuses through the skin. I don't know. It's a good question, but I don't really know the answer. But obviously they can. That's all I can say. I don't know how long-lived figs are in the tropics, because fruiting isn't seasonal, is it, in the tropics? You know, things that fruit all the time, don't they? You know, so it may be that they're quite short-lived and only there for a few weeks. I don't know, but obviously they can.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Nora. She said, how many generations of aphids do you find in a spiral poplar gall, and are all the winged ones the same sex?
I'd have to go back to my chart to be sure about this, but I think that the final generation, which mates before the females go off to lay on the herbaceous host, I think those are winged males and winged females.
So are the winged males and females inside the gall or outside?
Well, they will be inside the gall to start with before they emerge.
Okay.
If you open one of those galls, you'll find lots of aphid in there.
I opened one the other day and I could see there were both winged and wingless aphids in there. But I've read about them in a couple of books, and in Michael Chinnery's, I'm sure he said that there was that the Fundatrix lays one set of eggs, and they're all female, and then the second generation is the winged ones.
Right.
But then I got a little bit lost. So the second generation are winged ones, but do they have to trying to work out in the head where the male and the female ones are? So
Well,
they've got to come 2 generations before you get the before you get the male and female.
As I understand it, I'm not an expert on aphid life cycles, but as I understand it, yes, there are several generations during the summer, and it's the final generation that is the winged generation, so that the female can fly off.
So do you think there might actually, that the number of generations before the winged ones, it varies? Might not be. I
have to say, I don't know.
Okay.
Right. I know about the galls, but I haven't got all the aphid life cycle at my fingertips. But I'm sure that information is available. I know it's very complex. Aphid life cycles are complex.
Yeah.
I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's at least 5 different versions of the imago in aphids in that life cycle alone.
There might be something on that Holland site, Bladermeyer's.
Yes.
Yes. It might be.
I will look there. Thank you then. Thank you.
Yeah. And there must be a British Aphid Society or something similar. Not that I've ever come across it.
Yeah. I did a search, but I didn't find out any more information really than what I already knew from looking at Margaret's book and Michael Chinnery's.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we don't have any more questions in the chat, so if anybody wants to unmute themselves or put another question in the chat, feel free.
Yeah, could I? Oh, there's a hand up first.
It's all right, you go first.
Pete, have you got any examples of galls on lichens?
No. No, I haven't. I just know that there are galls on lichens. Are you going on the field trip?
I am now. I didn't realise.
Well, ask Tommy Root. I think he might know.
Yeah,
I mean, there is an argument that all algae are not all algae. That all lichens are galls because of the combination, that brings them into being. But I don't know. But I'm guessing that Tommy will. Oh,
that's interesting because algae does change the shape of the lichen, doesn't it? Because
yes. Did you see what he just put up? He says he knows diddly squat about lichens. Well, there you are. There's a project for some of you going on the field meeting. Find out about galls on lichens and tell Tommy, and then he can tell the rest of us.
I've looked at plenty of lichens and I've never seen them. But maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's the algae that's actually the gall causer. Yes, maybe. By the way, I have actually found the spiral gall on Lombardy poplar.
Oh, there you go. There's your answer, Nora.
Yeah. Thank you, Tommy.
That was down in Millbrook in Southampton. Okay, that's me.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Jenny, do you want to ask a question?
Earlier on in your talk, you talked about you're not quite sure what makes the actual what. I wondered whether anybody had done any chemical analysis on a normal sort of bud and then a galled bud.
Yeah. I mean,
because in moths you get green islands. In leaf mines, which I think is caused by some chemical reaction from the larva. So
I mean, a long-standing member of the Gall Society named Chris Leach is a what's the word? Chemical biologist. I can't think of the word. And he's done experiments and so on, and I don't think he's reached any firm conclusion. I mean, what's obviously happening is that the host's DNA is being corrupted and being changed by the gall causers, but the actual mechanisms and how that works, I don't think we know. It's like, what are the things that cause changes in behaviour in ants and others? Wolbachia.
Yes, I think that's to do. That's the Green Island one as well.
That's the Green Island one as well.
Yeah.
So there's obviously some way of unlocking the genetic code of the host species, and using it to produce what you want to produce. I mean, if you're an oak gall, things like the Nopper gall and oak apples and things like that. I mean, there are layers of cells, parenchyma cells and sclerochima, is it? Parenchyma and whatever the other one is. Layers of cells which are rearranged and used by the gall causer. There are some galls where the food for the gall causer is actually fungus inside the gall that grows inside the gall, which is another. So then there's 3 species involved. The host, the gall causer, and the fungal causer. So I think it would be a good PhD project for somebody.
Yeah, I'm too thick for that, I'm afraid. So, and too old.
No.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Sue, did you want to ask a question? Sue?
Sorry, yes. So my question is, I'm intrigued about the Nopper galls because I've noticed that they're sticky, and about how it is the insect, this tiny insect, has caused the oak tree to produce a substance that it doesn't normally produce. So I imagine it's that must be at a gene level. So it's switching on. It must be switching on genes that are already there, that are normally switched off.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm just trying to get my head around that, and I can't. It's just amazing, isn't it? So you're really looking at an insect that's controlling the genes of the oak tree, and the mechanism for that, you're saying we don't really know how it does that.
No, not to my knowledge. No.
Wow.
But while we're talking about Nopper galls, just another trivia fact about them is when they fall from the tree, the larva is still inside the gall, and it can lie inside the gall in the leaf litter for up to 4 years.
Wow.
and there are other gall causers that will live for years before they emerge. Yeah.
So can I ask another question on that then? If they're still living and it's falling from the tree, where are they getting their nutrient source to carry on growing? Is that just in the...
They're not, they're just moribund.
Oh, so they're just sort of not pupating, they're just...
Well, I honestly can't remember whether they pupate and then wait for 3 or 4 years to emerge, or whether they remain as larvae, then pupate and emerge, at the same time. But yeah, that's what they do. There's some very, very interesting mechanisms. Well, there's interesting mechanisms in the insect world all round. I mean, my son lives in Ohio, and they had one of the years this year, I think it's once every 7 years, where the cicadas emerge. And for a few weeks this summer, there was just this enormous racket going on all the time. And I think it's about once every 7 years. So it's not unusual for insect life cycles to spread over a long time, but it certainly is the case with some of the gall causers.
Nora, do you have a question?
Yes, can I ask another question? I've been looking for galls on oak trees and found loads of Nopper galls, but I particularly wanted to have a closer look at the inside of artichoke galls, and I've only found a few.
Right.
Have people found that there are, fewer of those around this year?
I've not had any reports of either abundance or lack of abundance. They're never as numerous as some of the other galls. No. And the prime place to find them is really on saplings. you know, like 5, 8, 10-year-old oak saplings.
Oh yeah.
I always seem to find them on those on young trees. So trees that are about, you know, 2 meters high now. Then that if you can find somewhere that's got some of those. Sorry?
I'll keep looking.
Yeah, keep looking. Yeah. Some of them can be elusive, but the thing is, though, not particularly with those, but there are some galls that you can never find. But once you've found them and you've got what they look like in your head, you start finding them much more.
Yeah,
frequently.
certainly. Yeah. I know what they look like, but
yeah.
Thank you anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any more questions? No? Okay, then, so yeah, thank you, Pete, and thank you everyone for joining us today. If you'd like to watch the talk back, I'll be sending out a link with the recording, and hopefully some of you can join us next week in Northwich. So yeah, thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank you very
much.
much.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.